Hey everyone, I'm Alex from Cytonox, and today I'll be ranking the chapters of Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door from worst to best. Unlike the first entry, this game has some real polarity and quality, carrying both some of the best chapters the series has to offer, as well as some of the lowest dregs. Let's get into them. I absolutely hate this chapter. Whenever I consider replaying the game, the first thing that comes to mind is, ugh, but then I'll have to play through Chapter 2 again. And yet, for most of my life, I wasn't exactly sure why. I think it looks pretty nice, and it's a creative idea for a setting too. Even if it sucked in some ways, you'd think having at least two categories where it excels would put it somewhere near the middle, right? But that is not the case. Rather, it's a testament to how much this dull, poorly designed sewage slog of a chapter sucks in almost every other existing metric. First off, the whole babysit the punies thing this chapter has you doing sucks f***ing balls. The AI on these things is horrible. They will randomly stop following you and strand themselves in the middle of nowhere, leaving you to find them since you need all 101 for the pressure plate things. When I say randomly, I mean randomly. They inexplicably move slower than Mario's walk speed, so even if you move normally, you'll still eventually lose them. Why would you bother doing this? They're like small bug creatures, so obviously they'd move slow, I get that. But is it seriously worth f***ing up the gameplay this bad for immersion? Immersion? This is f***ing Paper Mario! No one is playing this for immersion. Jesus Christ. And then there are the puny and Jabby fights. Jabbies are basically a rival tribe of bug or something to the punies. Throughout the chapter, you gotta beat two hives of them, one with not so many and one with a full 100. The outcome comes down entirely to luck, and it can screw you over hard. I lost 4 times in a row, which translates to just under 10 minutes of watching these things fight and kick me out. Finally, there's the puzzles relating to blowing them off the ground into holes and off ledges. These are the worst. These dumb runts just love to refuse to go off, leading to a frustrating, unintentional puzzle of trying to figure out how to progress, despite the AI's insistence otherwise. Like, look at this shit. Why are these guys standing so out of line with the hole? And if you haven't played the game, you're probably curious what that hideous, gaudy, naked, fat cloud woman is. She's the partner you get in this chapter, Madame Flurry, who, if you can't tell, I disdain. She is such an eyesore that I never have her active if possible, simply because I don't want to look at her. And why the hell did they give her boobs? Boobs that Mario grabs while making her blow? Man, what the hell? This is too weird. Oh, and the music. While the outdoors theme is fine, the song in the tree is incredibly irritating to me. I'm not sure why, but it pisses me off for some reason. Insult to injury, I guess. And the layout. I don't even have a clue what they were thinking with this. Both the tree and the outdoors part are long corridor-like stretches, one horizontal and one vertical. This makes traversing it a nightmare, since you have to go through every single room to get from one side to another. Having to travel all the way up and down the tree is such a pointless and solvable issue. Just make a shortcut pipe to the other side or something down at the bottom. Then there's the enemies. Most are passable, at least up until you start running into the yuckses later on. These things can shield themselves by creating smaller clones of itself, which makes each fight with them at least a turn longer than it would otherwise be, which is irritating as hell when you've been playing this chapter for like an hour. The boss fights are decent, I guess. The Shadow Sirens aren't much trouble, but make for a break in the monotony, and Lord Crump is a bright spot in this otherwise bleak section of the game, with him and his robot being the chapter boss. The laughably easy self-destruct sequence is at least a solid lead-up to the fight. While he doesn't pose all that much challenge, it sets up the cooler fight with him in Chapter 7. All that aside, this is, without a doubt, my least favorite chapter in the series. In fact, whenever someone mentions loving a game and wanting to replay it but dreading a certain section, this is what comes to mind for me. It has more things done right than a decent amount of chapters, like the setting, but the pathetic lows this chapter drops to are the final nail in the coffin for me. Funny story. I actually failed to record this chapter in my playthrough. Refusing to use someone else's gameplay, at least from YouTube, I struck a deal with my little brother where if I did him a favor, he'd play up through Chapter 4 and record it for me while I did other stuff. So this is all my brother's gameplay here. Thanks, Luke. Anyways, the chapter. This is the most polarizing chapter in the whole series, I'd say. You love it or hate it. You already know where I fall, but I can understand why people would like it at least. It has one of the coolest settings the game has to offer, and anyone who loves spooky stuff like myself will dig it. You've got the looming moon, shadows, woods, the aptly named creepy steeple, the works. The story is also pretty interesting, with Mario getting his body stolen and having to recover it from Dupless, a shape-shifting prankster ghost after a fake boss fight with him halfway through the chapter. You also get Vivian as a partner here, who is widely considered the best party member in the game. So what's my issue? The gameplay, namely the backtracking. The insane backtracking. The amount of times you must travel through the Twilight Trail is ridiculous. One time to get to the steeple? Cool. One time to get back after you get body snatched? Alright. Again to get back to the steeple? Annoying. A fourth time to tell Dupless his name to break the curse? Pain in the ass. A fifth time to chase him back? How the hell do you justify this? The enemy encounters are both hard to evade and frustrating. Amazy, Daisies, and Clefts, two of the most hated enemies the franchise has ever known, are sprinkled about like piss in a public bathroom. And they know they did this shit too. Look at the bit where you gotta fold and walk into this crevice. Avoiding this guy here takes insane luck, and you almost certainly will have to fight and subsequently run away from this prick. There is a special place in hell for the guy who thought backtracking through here was fun, where he must infinitely go back and forth through Twilight Trail with no end. Serves him right. It's such a shame that a concept this neat was butchered so horribly. Dupless is my personal favorite boss character in the game, and this maybe could have even been my favorite chapter. The whole having to guess his name thing was cool and allowed for some laughs at his expense if you felt like it. I can't bring myself to hate on this chapter too hard, since as I said, I'm pretty conflicted over it, but in the end I'd still classify it as a net negative experience in any playthrough. It says a lot that the intro chapter is well into the middle of the ranking. Like its Paper Mario 64 counterpart, this one is pretty by the book. Another field and castle. It's worth mentioning that for some reason I prefer Paper Mario 64's Chapter 1 to Thousand Year Doors. Not sure why, since this one is pretty much just objectively better. I think I just miss spin dashing. Anyways, this one does some stuff well that 64's didn't. It does have more area variety since it has the whole sewer section and Stone Fortress mini area. Neither of these is too interesting though. The sewers are literally just a multiple room straightaway with some fuzzies in it. It's a break from the field though, so that's worth something. As for the field, I have nothing to say. Not out of dislike or anything. There is just not much worth commenting on. It's a green field with Goombas and Koopas in it. I could copy-paste my commentary on 64's Chapter 1 here and it'd fit just fine. The castle is the meat of the chapter. It's a lot more colorful and vibrant than some castles in the rest of the games, and it has some neat rooms like the Spike Trap one. Although I feel like they should lower the time limit on this thing to make it actually stressful. The suspense is sorta dead knowing you'll get out with like half a minute to spare. The block puzzles with Koops are nothing special but fitting for an introductory chapter. The boss, Hooktail, has a crushing weakness to the sound crickets make, which makes her a joke if you exploit the bad sound effect change. She does at least eat the audience and regain some health, but it serves to buy her more screen time more than anything else, since without it she'd have gotten less than some enemy encounters I had. As always, this first chapter is an uninteresting but not wholly unpleasant experience, in keeping with Paper Mario tradition. I used to have this swapped with Chapter 4 actually. Both of these are known as the backtracking chapters, with 4 having Twilight Trail and this having the General White Quest. For whatever reason, I was always under the illusion that the General White Quest was the more offensive of the two. But this recent playthrough I realized it's actually quite the opposite. This one isn't even that bad. No enemy encounters to really worry about, and the shortcut pipes in the sewers take you pretty much right where you gotta go. I did it all in under 10 minutes. Don't get me wrong, it's still annoying, but nowhere near any of the TDM 2 and 4 have. The payoff for the quest is cool too, since Mario literally gets shot out of a cannon to the moon. That's pretty hardcore. The moon is a neat area, although the movement speed is torture. Avoiding the clefts is also pretty much impossible. And yes, there are clefts even on the moon. These things are relentless in making sure the game is less fun for me. Never thought about it before, but they're in like half the chapters in the game in some form. Yuxes are here too, which is also a strike against this chapter. I already talked about them earlier, but these ones are even worse since they have endgame damage and health. Fortunately, the moon section is rather brief and then you get to the X-Naut Fortress. This area is awesome. Hell, it's probably my favorite in the game. It's got a catchy theme to it and looks neat as well. It was also foreshadowed by the Peach interludes between the chapters, so you were already sort of familiar with it design-wise at least. The puzzles are well made and everything is connected pretty well by the elevators, although I'm not sure why they had to make each elevator limited to the upper and lower floors respectively. The platforming section near the end is a highlight also. It looks pretty complicated but isn't overwhelming, and it makes for a nice final stretch before the boss. Speaking of the boss, he's probably my second favorite in the game. He packs a solid punch and can really get you on the ropes if you start running out of resources like I did. With careful planning, you can still take him down and watch as his mech explodes, sending him flying into the vacuum of space to suffocate and die. Or fly into Poshley Heights if the ending is anything to go off of. It's anyone's guess how that happened. Finally, it caps off with the apparent death of Tech, the friendly AI, and you teleport back to the Rogueport sewers. While marred by a frustrating first half, the amazing second half of this chapter redeems it a little, granting it a middle spot right here. This is another chapter I can't help but to compare to its Paper Mario 64 counterpart. The fact that they both share an island theme makes it hard to ignore. However, I'm a lot less sure which of these I prefer than I was with Chapter 1. This one does a lot of stuff right. I'd say here is where the chapter quality shoots up a lot. The main critique of this chapter I hear about is the backtracking, but I think it's a lot less gratuitous than the other examples in the game, so I never minded it as much. Coming out of Chapter 4, it's like benching 300 pounds and then benching just the bar. It feels like nothing compared to what you just did. The enemies are also more avoidable and aren't that bad to fight anyways. There's a cool reference to Mario and Luigi's Superstar Saga snuck in here when you gotta deliver some Chocola Cola to Admiral Bobbery, which oddly seems to imply that Paper Mario shares a universe with other Mario games. As a big fan of the RPGs, I thought it was neat. This chapter can be divided into two parts, the island and the pirate grotto. The island is mostly just stuff revolving around Flavio and his crew, who are entertaining characters, so I'm fine with it. The actual fighting and puzzle solving is mainly left to the grotto, which is the more interesting of the two for sure. Almost every partner gets some time to shine in overworld puzzles here, except Flurry, which is fine by me. There's also a big platforming room near the end like the one in Chapter 7 sorta. Not as cool as that one, but still a nice way to cap off the grotto. The enemies are fine too, although I wish they'd ditch the Bullet Bill Blaster hallway thing. For some reason that's something that keeps popping up ever since the original game, and I never could guess why. No one likes just fighting Bullet Bills over and over. That aside, the rest of the combat is great too. Cortez is my favorite boss fight in the game. He's got a lot of different phases with a cool curtain transition between each of them. He's also Spanish, which seems to imply that Spain exists in Mario too. I guess if Mario is Italian, it stands to reason the rest of Europe is there somewhere too. The chapter is unique in that it has two bosses, the second one being Lord Crump after he betrays you and reveals that Four Eyes was in fact him all along. This fight is also well done and makes for a solid surprise ending. Cortez reforming to act as an ally for Mario was an unprecedented but welcome change to the usual formula as well. I'd give this chapter solid marks, but it doesn't quite reach the heights of later chapters, stranding it here in the middle. These top few were pretty tricky to place, which I'm starting to notice is a trend in our videos. Here it comes down to minutia and things like replay value, which is how I justified this placement. Chapter 6 is an oddball to be sure, but mostly loved by the community regardless. There is almost no combat, and it's all about talking to characters and solving mysteries instead. This sounds like it could go horribly wrong, but somehow it's entertaining even on repeat playthroughs. The main gist is that Mario works with Pennington, a detective from Shiver City. Of course I'm a sucker for this callback to Chapter 7 from the original. Early on, Mario finds a note vaguely promising a yummy sticky threat, and must deduce its author, who is still on the train. Eventually, you narrow it down to the actor Zip Toad, revealed to be Dupless in disguise working with the Shadow Sirens. Before you can apprehend him, however, he escapes at the Riverside Station stop. This stop is the only traditional gameplay segment. I think it can be a bit spammy with enemies, but it is otherwise a solid break from the Chapter 6 formula. It's got sort of an unnerving feel to it, which I can't really pinpoint the cause of. It's just a station at sunset, not sure why it creeps me out more than anything in Chapter 4. Maybe it's because it's so deserted looking? Hard to say. Some good puzzles and platforming here along with a great look make for a solid interlude between days 2 and 3. Then, breaking yet another convention, the boss comes like 3/4 through the chapter and not at the end. It's not too memorable since it's just a bunch of black ball guys forming a bigger one called Smorg. You can beat it down with Bobbery and finally reach Poshley Heights, the location of the Crystal Star. This is another awesome set piece. You find that the Crystal Star is taken just as you arrive, only for Pennington to reveal it was a fake and to task you with finding the real one somewhere hidden in the sanctum. You end up entering the painting somehow and navigating a strange mirror dimension full of dark booze to finally reach it. The theme here is also pretty haunting and eerie. It's an overall great way to cap off the chapter. I didn't praise this enough earlier, but the conversations and side-questy train bits are pretty funny and well written as well. While it could have been a disaster, Chapter 6 skillfully makes sure to break its dialogue-heavy structure with some conventional gameplay, making it not a pain on replays despite being text-heavy. Here's another convention breaker. Chapter 6's polar opposite. There is one thing this chapter is full of: fighting. Mario basically enters the Mushroom Kingdom equivalent of the WWE, gets given the stage name the Great Gonzalez, and works his way up the ranks. Most of the fights are against unique enemies never seen anywhere else, giving this an incredibly varied spread of combat no other chapter has. It's even got a surprise fight with Bowser that is seriously hard to win if you don't get lucky like I did, since he jumps in right after an already grueling fight with no reprieve. You also get the Yoshi Kid partner, who I egotistically named after myself since I always do that in every game where I can name things. I already said this in the first Paper Mario ranking video, but I love Yoshi, so of course he's my favorite partner in the game. He's a bit of a shithead to NPCs too, which I find hilarious. He seems to view everyone but Mario as a nuisance to be treated with absolute disdain. He is by far the best character to keep out for scripted character interactions, since he always has the most amusing commentary on stuff. He functions a lot like Lady Bow from the original in combat, who is my favorite there too. I guess I like low damage, rapid fire attacking partners. The story here is pretty great too. It's got this whole plot about missing fighters and other unexplained mysteries that you figure out as you progress up the ranks. Eventually you expose Grubba, the fight promoter, as the guy responsible for the vanishings, so he runs off to the arena to revoke his natty card and fights you on Crystal Star-powered roids. He unfortunately forgets to actually attack and mainly just buffs himself by showing off. This predictably leads to a pretty easy boss fight that I still enjoy nonetheless. I don't really have a ton more to say than this, which speaks a lot to its quality. If you haven't noticed, I can blab on for ages about stuff that pisses me off, and if I like something, I usually just call it cool and move on. That's why I can rant about hating Chapter 2 for twice as long as any other chapter, for example. So yeah, Chapter 3 is cool. And here we have it. Unlike the original, Thousand Year Door's final moments are also its most masterfully executed. Rather than another romp through Bowser's castle, this is an all-new area, the titular Thousand Year Door in the Palace of Shadow. It's got everything you could want in a chapter. It has good enemy design and plenty of boss fights, a dark, eerie atmosphere fitting for the resting place of an ancient, world-ending demon, and one of the coolest sub-areas in the game, the Riddle Tower. In the middle of this random, out-of-place seeming plaza, there's a tower in the distance you spend a good chunk of time trying to get into. It's satisfying finally getting there, solving all the rooms, and placing all the keys in the pedestals to activate the machinery to let you progress. I also like how it has its own unique theme from the rest of the area, which further sets it apart as alien and unfamiliar. The layout is perfect in my opinion, with no frustrating backtracking or the like to be found. Even the pre-chapter segment is brief. No side quests or things you gotta do, you just show up, open the door, and stroll on in. The boss fight with Grodus being followed by Bowser and Cammy was great too. What ordinarily might not have been a challenging fight becomes intense and high stakes when you're already low on FP, star power, and items. And of course there's the final boss, the Shadow Queen, who is pretty imposing in her own right. She does have the classic invincibility phase that a lot of RPG final bosses tend to have, but it gets shattered pretty quick by a Mushroom Kingdom-wide spirit bomb, and the power of friendship opens her up to more hammer whacking and head stomping shortly after. The unique aesthetic, well-crafted gameplay, and gripping finale cement Chapter 8 as my personal favorite in the entirety of the Thousand Year Door. There you have it. That's 2 Paper Mario games down and 1 to go. Hope you guys enjoyed, and be sure to like and subscribe. I'll have the Super Paper Mario chapter ranking out sometime in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. Deuces.